Welcome to Generations, a show for seniors, people who know seniors, or people who someday are going to become seniors. I'm David Lapaco. I'll be your host for this episode of Generations. And let me start by introducing our co-chairs for this episode. And since we're recording this in the dead of winter, I think it's time to try to think positively about winter. And so I'll ask them each to find one positive thing that they really value and like about winter. First of all, let's take our best smiler of the group. I think that's Rashida Jenkins. You have the winning smile. How are you? And is there anything positive you can say about winter?
Thank you. I am well. And I actually enjoy winter. I'm born and raised in Minnesota, and I went snowshoeing for the first time a couple years ago, and I fell in love with it. So I actually love winter and the snow.
Okay, snowshoeing. Next, we have Nadia Giordana. Nadia, how are you doing? And say something uplifting about winter if you can.
I'm doing fine. And I would say that what I like about winter, I think especially the winter nights can be really cozy. And I also love the idea and the practice of getting things done over the winter months that I neglected the previous summer months.
That makes sense. You can get some things done that you wouldn't otherwise. So, with all those summer distractions. Finally, we have Mike Rosberg, our third co-chair. Mike, how are you doing? And anything you can think about that's positive with respect to winter?
Well, this is a very personal thing, but I find it much easier to walk during the winter because I have a tendency to get burning feet. So I don't have to put all sorts of stuff on my feet when it's 80 degrees. Uh, as I would when it's 80 degrees, I just go out the door and everything goes very well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Viewers at home, thank you. Hang in there. We'll get through this and find some positivity with winter. I mentioned winter specifically also because our guest for today, our featured guest, Amy Zellmer, had a very bad winter experience in 2014. And it's part of the reason she was here. She was a guest on this program last summer and talked about traumatic brain injuries. And she can claim to know quite a bit about that because she slipped on some black ice. I think it was a downward sloping driveway, hit her head, was unconscious for a while, and to this day is still dealing with the after effects of that traumatic brain injury. And so last summer, she was on this program and we talked about traumatic brain injuries and ways to deal with those. But we'd like to kind of flip it the other way. It was almost like we didn't get to the how do you maintain brain health? And Amy has an interest in this subject, both from in terms of avoiding bad stuff, but also preventing bad stuff from happening through mental health and mental sharpness. A lot of what she's done has been with brain injury, with the Brain Injury Advisory Council and the Brain Injury Association of America. She has two books dealing with brain injury, but we're going to turn it the other way today and look at the idea of promoting sharpness and mental acuity, even in today's Star Tribune this morning, bottom of page 1A headline, dementia cases in the US will surge in the coming decades, researchers say, and will probably double in the next 25 years. If that doesn't make you just a little bit paranoid, I don't know what would. So, Amy, here, our mental health coach, special guest today, thank you for coming back after appearing with us last summer. And my first question to you is this a depressing scenario, or is there any ray of hope here in terms of people being able to avoid dementia? Because I think we all have a right to be a little bit paranoid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for having me back. It's exciting to be here again. Um, yeah, there is hope. Our brains are a very incredible organ. And there's this thing called neuroplasticity, and it means our brains are plasticky and can mold and shape, and we can rework them. And so there's a lot of hope for us. And dementia is a really real threat. And there's a lot of research coming out. A lot of it can play into our diets and what we're eating and putting into our bodies. But there's a lot of things we can do. We can change our diets, but There's also, exercises we can be doing to help keep our brains sharp and healthy, just like your muscles, your biceps, we can lift weights to build biceps. We can do exercises for our brain to help keep our brain in tip-top shape as well.
So for any of these things, can you be a tad more specific? If I'm supposed to eat better or do exercises, what in the heck should I be doing?
Well, okay, so I can give you a few kind of easy things that you can be doing. Um, as far as exercising our brain, one really cool thing that we can do is, and some of you have maybe heard like find a word puzzles, right? My mom is 87 and she does find a words all the time. Those can kind of just help keep that mental acuity. Um, but also, have you heard of critical thinking puzzles? They're like word puzzles, and you have to try and figure out, it gives you like a paragraph scenario, and you have to figure out like which person was in which room by process of elimination. And you can Google critical thinking puzzles and download sheets of them for free. And I love doing these because they're fun. They're kind of like solving a mystery, but yet you're really working those brain muscles by doing that critical thinking. Those are really, really good for kind of helping to keep your brain sharp. But also simple things like going for a walk. And as you're on your walk, so we're walking, we're doing a physical activity, but while you're walking, you can talk to someone, or like you could take a tennis ball and toss it from hand to hand as you're walking. So now you're incorporating more than just the walking motion. You're incorporating hand to eye, or talking to somebody and having a conversation. Like you're doing more than one thing at a time, and that kind of helps keep the brain moving. And then as far as diet, there's tons of books and articles you can Google. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, but um, cleaning up your diet, eating less inflammatory foods. So if you Google like anti-inflammatory foods, like berries, things high in antioxidants, fish oils, these types of foods are really good at keeping that inflammation, because that's what dementia is coming from. It's coming from inflammation in our brain and our gut. And so the more we can do to have an anti-inflammatory diet, the better our brain health can be.
I could just take a quick step back and ask you
That was a lot.
uh, ask you about something you mentioned, and that is, I think people have long thought, and I'm sure I have as well, that physical fitness is one thing, and mental fitness or mental sharpness is quite another. But it appears that the two are actually related, and they can aid one another. Is that true?
Yeah, they go hand in hand. We have to take care of the body that our brain is in charge of, as well as our brain.
Mhm.
I have a question. I have been hearing about on and off over a period of years, and I'm curious, Amy, what you have learned about, because this is in connection with what you're talking about as far as inflammation. And inflammation is important in a lot of areas of the body. But where the brain is concerned, I've been hearing enough lately to put start really wondering about this. But you hear that the care of your teeth is
Mm.
important so that they don't get inflamed back up towards the sinuses, or you might not even know that there's inflammation in your mouth or in your teeth as people get older, and that affects the brain. Have you learned anything about that area?
hmm Um, I'm not an expert in that area by any means, but I do know that oral health is very important to our overall health, and that bacteria in your mouth can go right into your bloodstream. And my ex-husband, he had a heart condition. And so that's one of the things when you have a heart condition, they really kind of like preach into you is your oral health because that can all go straight to your heart. And I have to believe, it can also get into that blood-brain barrier as well.
Hmm.
You know, traumatic brain injuries, I state, are like the invisible issue, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you look fine, you present well, there's doesn't look like anything is physically wrong with you. So how do you bring awareness to people who would say, "Oh, you're fine, you just, like you say, go for a walk." But it's more, involved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you bring awareness to keeping your brain healthy so that you can prevent,
Mm-hmm.
having these issues in the first place?
Yeah, yeah. And so that's a really great question. So after my brain injury, I learned a lot about like protecting our brain against a future brain injury or dementia, or like if you haven't had a brain injury, like things to help if you were to have one, or if you were to have a secondary brain injury, right? Because that's a very real thing. Once you've had a brain injury, your balance and coordination can be off. You're more likely to trip and fall again, right? Um, so things like fish oil, vitamin D, again, eating that anti-inflammatory diet. Um, and as far as bringing awareness, that's why I do things like this. Anytime anyone asks me to be part of something where I can share my story, I'm always a yes because um, that's the thing. Many of us, we walk and talk just fine. I remember being at an event. My book had just come out. Um, and I was at an event and the person asked me, "Oh, what made you decide to write about traumatic brain injury?" And I was like, "Well, it's my story." And they were like, "Oh, but you talk fine. I wouldn't have ever guessed you had a brain injury." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like it didn't affect my speech. Like some people it might, and some people might have a physical outward injury, or a stutter neuropathy like in an arm or where you see their arm is toned and turned in or, so you just never know. And that's my biggest thing is like, we just need to have more empathy and compassion in this world because you just don't know what somebody is going through.
Absolutely.
Well, now, Amy, since it's a drug-oriented culture to live in, I certainly see on television a particular product that I'm thinking of. There are others, I'm sure, as well. Begins with a P and ends with an N, and they're talking about how this promotes brain health, and because it comes from something in jellyfish. And I have no idea what science is behind that product, but do you have any take on these medications that are designed to improve brain function? Have you heard anything about them or?
um yeah, I'm not sure the one you're talking about. It might be what I've heard about. It's an actual prescription
I think
that
so,
you're
yeah.
talking about.
No, no,
Yeah.
it's over the counter. It's over the counter.
Over.
Oh, like a supplement. Yeah, there's so many claims out there, and as we know, supplements aren't regulated by the FDA. Um, the ones I know that help are like I've said, vitamin D, fish oils. Those are very helpful for everybody. Of course, talk to your doctor first, especially like if you're on a blood thinner, because they can also cause blood thinning. Um, and then as you age, it can be easier to have bleeding disorders. But I know that these things do help protect our brains. They help fight inflammation. And I'm sure, I'm on some other stuff that my nutritionist has helped me get on as well. And I can tell when I forget to take it. And
Hmm.
that's when you know something's actually helping. Because I moved into an RV, and so it took me a few weeks to travel to Phoenix, and I got off my routine, right, of taking my supplements, and I was like, man, I'm just feeling foggy and fuzzy. Like, what's going on? I've been drinking my water because that's another thing. Drink plenty of water, stay hydrated. Our brain loves to be hydrated. Um, but I was like, what is going on? Why am I feeling so fuzzy? And then it dawned on me I hadn't taken my supplements in like 10 days.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, that's when you know.
yeah. Certainly one of the big ideas that you mentioned earlier, this plasticity of the brain. We often think about our heart or our liver or kidneys or something as being living organisms. But the brain is sort of like this metal cage up there that doesn't really do anything. But several years ago, I read a book called The Shallows, which has talked about the impact of the internet on our attention span.
Mhm.
It's about the plasticity of the brain and how London cab drivers who have to memorize a whole bunch of streets, they take an exam, an exhaustive exam where they have to know all of these streets that go in weird, they're not straight perpendicular to one another or anything, and they have to take this massive test. They actually sampled the brains of those London cab drivers and found that the portion of the brain that deals with memory is physically larger. The brain has responded to the need to have this a place for this information. And so it's a growing, living organ. And if we think of it that way, then it changes everything about what we do.
Mhm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, yeah, I think the internet's made us dumber. We our smartphones, right? We don't have to memorize phone numbers anymore. We don't have to memorize someone's address. We just push a button and it takes us there. Um, and so we're not using those connections. And that's where some of these, like that, those critical thinking games and such, that forces us to use those pathways, because neuroplasticity, the cool thing. So brain injury or whatever, it might attach to you, your brain is really smart and it learns how to wire itself around that injury.
Mhm.
The problem is it just keeps going in that path. It doesn't try to go back to that original path. So if we give it specific exercises to make it go back through that pathway, the more efficient pathway, it's like hopping on 494 instead of taking the city streets around, right? So our brain is now taking those city streets around to try and get to the mall, but we want it back on 494. So it's these like repetitive things, doing the same thing over and over and over for a few minutes a day. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. But doing a critical thinking uh, puzzle every day, or doing that ball and walking, or you don't even have to go out and go for a walk. Like if you're chair bound, you can even just like move your feet and toss that ball around, and even talk or listen to a podcast at the same time, like things like that even if we have 5 minutes a day, they can help us rewire the brain to a more effective route.
Yeah, there is one little exercise I'm considering doing myself, and it's due to the fact that whenever I take something from one room to another and set it down and then go off and do other things for a minute or two, I have absolutely no idea where I put it. So I thought, perhaps I could get 20 things, scatter them here and there, and then see how many of the 20 I can remember where I put, and
Scavenger hunt.
see if that helps at all.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
One thing that I didn't hear you mention, Amy, is how important rest is. Our
Mm-hmm.
body recovers during rest. And, in 2017, I sustained a traumatic brain injury falling on a construction site, and my body would shut down unless I rested. Nothing worked, no medicine, no changing of diet, no supplements. I had to
Yes.
rest. My body made me rest. My eyes would get blurry and I started seeing double vision until I laid down and took a nap. And then it was like I was refreshed again. So I think we have to mention how important rest is for our
Yeah.
bodies.
Absolutely. And it can be a vicious cycle when you've had a brain injury. Your whole system is offline. And
Yes.
so sometimes you can't fall asleep, or sometimes you just keep waking up every couple hours. So you're not getting that good rest. And that
Mhm.
can be a vicious cycle, because when you're not getting rest, your brain, that's when it recovers. That's when your memories go into long term, is when you're sleeping.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you can't get that good rest, you're not functioning well. So it turns into this vicious loop, and it can be really, really challenging.
Absolutely.
So
And
Amy, go
you men-
ahead.
you mentioned brain fog too. Does brain fog, as far as uh, improving brain fog and the occurrences of brain fog, is that more beneficial to get the rest that Rashida was talking about, or would that be more dietary? What are some of the best things to get rid of that brain fog that we sometimes get?
Mhm. And everybody's a little bit different, right? All of our biochemistry is different and unique to us, but brain fog is often inflammation.
Mm.
And so sleep is definitely one piece of that puzzle. But diet, supplementation, exercise, those are also all very important pieces to that puzzle. Um, and everybody like expresses brain fog a little differently. Some people, it's like this fuzzy feeling, like you almost have cotton balls inside your head. Some people say it feels like pressure inside their head. So everybody kind of experiences a little bit differently too. And some people can't even articulate what that feeling is. And so sometimes being able to give it that name, like brain fog, fuzziness, can be really helpful too. Because once you can name something and identify it and know that there's a plan of what you can help it, that in itself can be a really big weight lifted.
Yeah.
And a follow-up to that, just a real brief one, is I have heard people who have had major surgeries also
Mhm.
talk about that recovery period having brain fog. And I never put two and two together that way, but and maybe that's something completely different. I don't know.
Well, speaking of major surgery,
And
I
I need to talk to that. Anesthesia can be a chemical concussion.
Mm.
Oh,
Okay.
Our brains don't like anesthesia. They're important. We need anesthesia, but our brains don't like it.
good
Okay.
to know.
Mhm.
Mike, what was on your mind?
oh, I was just Nadia mentioned major surgery, and I heard of a case at the U of M Medical Center a year ago where a gentleman agreed to a brain transplant procedure, and they got on him, but midway through the procedure, he changed his mind. I had to
I'm
get
like, wait a minute. Okay,
That's good.
I didn't know where that was going.
Uh,
okay, okay.
Only from Mike.
yeah, our sit down comic over there. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Um,
That was good.
question I have is this sort of potentially kind of a dark side of retirement. I think about my adult professional life where day after day, week after week, I'm constantly juggling projects, deadlines, always having to think things through. And I worry that once I'm now almost retired, that I'm not going to have that kind of mental stimulation. And even my wife has asked me, why do you do this generation show? And beside the fact that it's enjoyable, part of my rationale is it's just good to
Yeah.
have challenges like this, to have to
Yes.
articulate an idea in this environment, and that it's good for my brain health. But is retirement something to be concerned about in that respect? Because it's a whole different level of mental activity sometimes.
Yeah. Such a great question topic. Um, because yeah, when you retire, a lot of folks slow down. Some don't. Some like get even more active, right? So it's important to have hobbies. Maybe you golf, maybe you bowl, maybe you join some sort of group. So it's important to have hobbies. It's important to still socialize, right? Senior centers, right? I watched my parents right around 80. They're 87 now, but somewhere in that early 80s, they kind of just stopped doing things. And man, I noticed a shift in their mental acuity. And it was fast. And I was trying to get them to do things and they just really weren't interested. Um, so I do really think there is something to that. And it's important to have things that have meaning to you, things that you enjoy doing. Um, maybe finding a group of walkers, like there's mall walkers, right? Or like some of the high schools let you come in and walk in the gym. There's plenty of groups out there to get involved in. Um, and so I think there's a lot of ways to stay active, and I do think it's important.
Mm. Well, my
I was
final
going to say
question would be,
pickleball.
is there a good way for us to sort of measure this? My last physical exam, for the first time, doctor gave me three words to remember in order, and he waited about 5 minutes and asked me again to recite those three words, and I thought, dang, I passed. But I mean, is there something, a way that we can check against our own behavior and say, oh, that's a sign, and I can actually sort of measure my mental state by that?
Mm, yeah, I like that. You know, there are some apps out there, and you put me on the spot, and I can't think of them. But there are some apps out there that can help you measure that kind of thing. Doing like exactly what you're talking about. I know that's part of the Medicare checkup, annual checkup thing is those three words because I've sat through my parents. Um, and um, oh gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. So like just really paying attention because I think the average person knows when things are starting to change. They just don't want to admit them to anyone.
Mhm.
And so really paying attention to yourself, or if you have a spouse or kids or a loved one that can really help keep you in check. Like I noticed my dad started repeating himself and that like came on fast, like out of nowhere. My dad never was like that. And I brought it up with him. Um, so just having that a loved one or someone who can really help like keep you in check on that too.
Yeah. Well, as usual, time is our enemy here, and we're probably
Mhm.
down to our last minute. Amy Zellmer, thank you so much for being here and getting us to think about our brain health. I think there are other resources that you certainly can find out there, and maybe this will be the first step for some people to do that. But brain health is going to be increasingly a concern in our world, especially as our demographics change. And so we don't want to be one of those statistics. And so I hope that our viewers will take that big idea away that brain health is really important. And so with that, I think we'll have to call a halt to this episode of the show and invite all of our viewers to come back next time for another edition of Generations.